Morning, everyone. I know 10 o'clock on Fridays is not the most opportune time to have a webinar, but we just wanted to make sure that since this is a timely issue, that we know that some students who are thinking of going to medical school or a dental school have decided to take a gap year, or some students are just thinking about taking a gap year. So we wanted to invite 3 alumni who did make the decision to take a gap year, and I think some may have taken 2 gap years, and talk about their experience. So but before I introduce the speakers, I just want to introduce Dr. James Kamara. He's Associate Professor of Chemistry, and he is now the new Director of Pre-Health Advisement on the Wilf campus. So he is going to be working with students interested in medical school, dental school, and other allied health fields on the Wilf campus. So without further ado, I just want to have Dr. Kamara just say a few words.
Hi, welcome everyone. And so, this is a thank you, first of all, for organizing this informative panel. Students often have some anxiety about how to plan and identify gap year opportunities. But I wanted to say a few words to students and people watching the recording later on about gap years in general. So first of all, most of our students at YU do have a gap year of some form. So students that are going to be applying when applications open in May aren't going to be starting medical school until 2024, which means there's this period between when they graduate, if they apply as seniors, and when they enter. And that period needs to be filled with something, right? And so that's kind of the standard gap year that our students have. But often our students decide that they're not going to apply at the end of their senior year, and they're going to wait a year to do that. That adds an additional gap year. I want to stress that medical school applications aren't a race. You apply when you're ready to apply and when you're ready to succeed. So with that, you should feel comfortable taking an additional year if you wish. And in fact, the national average for gap years is now 1.8 years, meaning that most students are taking an additional year to do something in that time. And the last thing I wanted to say is that we're going to hear from several successful, wonderful students and alumni. Excuse me. But it's important to remember that these are just a few stories. A successful gap year looks very different for multiple people. And so we're going to hear a lot of stories about research and graduate programs, but that does not have to be what your gap year is. Many successful applicants do things like be EMTs, they teach. There's lots and lots of choices for things to fill that time with. What the most important thing to do for your gap year is to be intentional and self-aware. So some students know that there's a weakness in their application, and they use that gap year to kind of fill that weakness with other activities. Other students know that they have a very strong application, but they're not quite ready to go. They have this thing that they want to pursue, and they find the opportunities to do that. And so working together, the pre-health department and the Career Center can help you actualize these ideas. So the pre-health advising center can help you figure out what kinds of opportunities would be good for you and make you a more competitive applicant. And the Career Center can help you identify actual opportunities and secure them. And so with that, if you have questions, the Career Center and the pre-health office are always open for them. We answer questions 365 days a year, except on Jewish holidays, and pretty much at any time. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the Career Center and Ms. Knapp.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for those words. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Zev Narrow, who is a third-year student at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Tehila Berger-Lipsky, who is a third-year student now at Weill Cornell School of Medicine. And Temi Latin, who is going to be entering her first year at Harvard Medical School starting September. Is it September, Temi?
July.
Oh, July. Okay, so it starts earlier. Sorry about that. So I am going to just have them first introduce themselves and tell a little bit about how they made their decision to spend the gap year, what they did during their gap year. So because I guess Chemi is here on. I just see she's on already. So I'm going to ask Chemi to start, and then we'll go to Zev, and then we'll go to Hila. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Temi. I'm going to Harvard in, I guess, the late summer. I'm currently working as a research assistant at Columbia Fertility Center in New York City. And I'm finishing my second year here, and then I'll be starting medical school.
Great. And do you want to say a little bit about what kind of made you decide to do that, to do the gap years that you did?
Sure. Yeah. When my end of college was kind of COVID time, and I really didn't feel like I had a strong clinical experience that I wanted to put on my application. And I was looking for more opportunities to get involved in research in a serious way with like a long-term commitment. And it was just a great way to do both of those, and also just prolong my ability to make my application a bit better before I applied.
Great. Zev, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Zev. I'm, like I said before, a third-year student at Einstein right now. And for my gap year, I was a research assistant at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine in one of the labs there, helping out with research and some other logistics of the lab. And I guess I decided to take a gap year because, like Dr. Kamara was saying, sometimes you realize that your application will be missing something. So I thought it was a good way to try and enhance my application, give myself more time to, besides the experience, just to get my application ready, work my personal statement, try and perfect the nitty gritty of my application. So rather than rushing it into a summer, when I was taking the MCAT later in the summer. So it just worked out in a few levels for me.
Okay, great. And Tehila?
Hi, I'm Tehila. I am a third year class of 2024 at Cornell. And I did my gap year. I spent a year learning in GPATs, and I taught a little bit of Ramaz and TA'd for some classes at Stern on the side that year as well. I guess a little different than my peers on the panel. I always wanted to take a year to go back to GPAS. That was a priority of mine coming into college. And I think that I was able to do a lot of research during my undergrad. And I actually felt like I didn't necessarily have to go about a year of research in order to strengthen that area of my application. So I was able to utilize the time to do something that I was really going to enjoy.
Great. And you want to just say what GPAS is for other people who don't know what it is?
Sure. GPAS is the Graduate Program of Advanced Talmudic Studies.
Great. Great. So how do you think, I mean, I think people alluded to it, but how do you think your gap year really enhanced your application? And since you're on, Tehila, maybe we'll ask you.
Sure. I think that's something that medical schools are looking for, or kind of like Dr. Kamara already alluded to, is just like that wholesome application. What gets you excited? What's going to make you into a passionate practitioner? And I think that whatever that looks like for you in whatever sphere, and it doesn't have to be like academic or research related at all, is something that they're going to get excited about. So GPAS was something that excited me. Teaching is something that excites me. And it is something that came up on my interview trail at almost every single interview. And I don't want to belittle that, because I think that's something people are often nervous about, but I don't think it came up in a negative way. I think it showed that I was passionate about something. And as long as you can weave that into how you're developing as an individual and how you're going to use that into developing yourself into a future professional, I think it's valid and even looked at positively.
Did you incorporate that into your personal statement? I'm just curious.
It wasn't incorporated into my personal statement. I think that, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about this at this point, but I was told by basically everyone in the career advisement office that I should shy away from kind of highlighting a lot of the kind of quote unquote Jewish things in my application. But it kind of came out on its own. I think that there were enough things that I was involved in, and doing GPAS for the year, it perked my interviewers' interests, and it came out anyways. It became a big subject of conversation.
Great. And Zev, what about you in terms of how you feel that that year enhanced your application?
So, like we were saying before, of course, there's the actual role that you have during your gap year, which hopefully fills some area you feel is weak in your application. But like Tahila was saying, similarly, even beyond just what the role is, I would say even just in your own time, having hobbies, being yourself for a little while is important. First of all, for yourself, but also because interviewers in medical schools want to see that you're a person, not just a robot who can check all the boxes. So if you have a hobby that's not even, officially related to the role that you had, but you mention it on part of your application, interviewers might still want to hear about that hobby and talk to you about it. So having the ability to just yourself a little bit, decompress, have a hobby after a busy undergrad and before a busy medical school, there's definitely a very significant value to that, both for yourself and for your application.
Okay, and you said you did some research, if I'm not mistaken, that year. Is that it during your gap year?
Yeah, my role was research related, so that was kind of to fill that part of my application I wanted to work on a bit. But it was still nice to have a little more time to, like I was saying, be myself, focus on hobbies, get my application ready beyond the actual time I was spending during the day be involved in research.
Great, great. And Rebecca, sorry, I just elevated Rebecca to a medical school. No, Chenley, do you want to tell a little bit about, again, how you feel that your time actually enhanced your application?
So I think a little bit different from Zev. My role is I'm a research assistant, but it's a little bit more clinical. So for me, something that I think was really important when applying to medical school is I needed to be able to show that I knew what being a doctor looked like. I knew what the medical field looked like. I was part of it. And I think that because I have a clinical research assistant position and I interact with patients regularly and I work with doctors and I'm part of the medical team, being able to write about it on my application, being able to discuss it in interviews and just explain how I know what medicine looks like, how I've had opportunities working with patients and what that has looked like, and discussing specific patient cases that were interesting to me and all of that really enhanced my application to be able to say, I know what being a doctor looks like. I've been part of it for almost 2 years. And then also, thank God, as part of my research, I was published a few times. So I can't say that's guaranteed in any research position that you have. I would recommend to people to kind of look at, if you want to do research, look at a lab and see if it's been productive in the past and maybe ask if there is publication opportunities, but that's just never guaranteed. But that just definitely helped my application because I got a few co-authorships.
Just to piggyback on what Temi said for a second about authorships, it's something that it's hard to stress because there's such variability in where you work, etc. But especially if you're thinking about doing something competitive while you're in medical school, having authorships will stay, that's the one thing that no matter when you do it, that stays with you for forever. So if you don't have publications from undergrad, that's okay, and you'll be able to make it up later. But if you can get a research-rich opportunity where you can put out a lot of publications, that could really transform your career in a really positive way.
Yeah, and I want to jump in for a second also, if I can.
Sure.
And add that I actually didn't get any publications or authorships from my gap year research because COVID slowed the lab down. I actually didn't end up getting anything from that. But it can still be a valuable experience even without that. Obviously, though, you want to make sure that the lab or clinical project that you're going into has been productive. You can get your name on some things. It's definitely a long-term help, like Tahila was saying. But there is opportunity medical school to do it, even though you're busier. But it's not like your opportunity was wasted if you didn't end up getting your name on something, although it definitely is ideal and helps long-term if you can.
Great.
I just want to say one more thing on that as well, which is that we have to remember that not all schools are focused on research. All medical schools are focused on research. Career-wise and industry-wise, there is a deficiency of primary care specialist, and a lot of schools are focused specifically on clinicians, right? And so, for instance, when we talk about Einstein in particular, we had a seminar with the dean of admissions from Einstein, and she basically said, if you had a choice between research and clinical experience, clinical experience every time for them because they want boots on the ground physicians. They can teach you how to do science. You have research opportunities, but that's really the more of the focus of their program. So it's a balance. You have to kind of also think about what kind of doctor you want to be, how you want to practice, and what types of institutions you would like to attend as you think about what your gap year opportunities might be.
Just one qualifier to that. When it comes into medical school, I absolutely agree with you. When it comes to career focusing, I'm entering the residency application process now. So maybe my perspective is a little skewed, but your metrics absolutely will depend on how many publications you have. And again, that's something that you can start doing in undergrad and do through your gap years, et cetera. I don't think that needs to be the focus of like how you make your decisions, but I think that it's just something to keep in mind in the back of your head as you go through the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think all of you, what all of you have said also is it's all how you weave it into your narrative, and how you can substantiate that while on an interview or you know, as you move forward in your career. But choosing something, it sounds like all of you, whatever you chose to do during that gap year, you were able to convince the medical schools of your narrative, and you were able to bring it in a way that enhanced your application. So I appreciate, even though you're all coming from different perspectives, that you're bringing that out. That's important. So in terms of your gap year, I guess a follow-up question would be, how did you go about finding your position for the gap year? And what would you say to students who are now in this situation of looking for gap year positions? So maybe we'll start with Zev.
Sure. I pursued two routes of trying to find a position for my gap year. The first was just applications, looking online at job postings and applying to jobs that seemed interesting. That actually didn't really lead me anywhere. Most of those were different descriptions than the job actually was, or they had jobs posted from years ago that they hadn't actually needed one for, or no one ever answered. So that didn't actually lead anywhere, although for some people it does. I know people that have gotten things that way. For me, it was through a connection to YU. I was doing research in a lab at YU, and the PI of the lab was at some meeting for her field, and someone there mentioned they were looking for someone to help out with research in the lab. So she recommended me, and I got in touch with them and interviewed and ended up with a job there. So I would say that you're welcome to try and look at job postings and all that and see what you can find. It may not be as productive. So I would definitely recommend using the Career Center, professors, especially the research involved, if you want to do research, or if they're not research involved, if you want to teach or do something else. People in YU who have experience, connections, know-how of the field is definitely a often more productive route to pursue.
Great. So you're saying networking. Part of it is just networking to people who are in positions who might be able to be helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. And Tehila, do you want to kind of chime in?
Sure. So again, like going to graduate school, GPAS was something that I had kind of always wanted to do, and the application process was a Google form in those days. But I think that's something that I had to pursue a lot when deciding to go to graduate school during my gap year, was how to fund and support myself during that time period. So I think that's something to keep in mind as you choose kind of which route to go, about how financially feasible things were. So for me, thinking about which jobs I can do on the side in order to subsidize the like small stipend I got from GPAS became a really important part of planning out my gap year.
Great. And Chemi.
Yeah, sure. I'll just jump on what Zev said. I applied to so many jobs on like through LinkedIn and ZipRecruiter and all those things. And it turns out the job I got, that the one that I chose, is the one I actually did apply to that way. But I got a lot of job offers, thank God. And that was the only one I got through that route. The rest of the other job offers I ended up getting and not choosing from were, like Zev said, networking. I knew somebody who was a doctor at Columbia, and I asked him to send like kind of a list to his friends like at Columbia if anyone was looking for somebody, and I got a lot of interest and opportunities through that. But the other thing that I did that worked really well, I didn't end up choosing those jobs, but if you just Google faculty labs and the name of the school, so let's say Faculty Labs Columbia, Faculty Labs Cornell, Faculty Labs Harvard, etc., Einstein, you'll get a list often of all the labs in that institution and the PI, which is the person who runs the lab, their email, and emailing them and asking them, hi, I'm graduating, I'm looking for a job. Do you have any opportunities? Or if not, do you know of anyone who I might be able to reach out to? Was also really helpful for me. And I got a lot of interest that way. A lot of those PIs who are looking for research assistants, they haven't even necessarily posted a job opportunity yet online, but if you reach out to them before they do it, you save them so many steps. They now have someone, they don't have to interview in the same way. And that was really successful as well. And some of them who said, I don't have a position, but at the end I said, do you know anyone else who might? And they referred me to other people. And then I could say, oh, so-and-so referred me. And that was also kind of networking in that way. And that was really great as well.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think all of those opportunities really are valuable. And the other, I just want to say in terms of networking, as someone talked about, Zev, you talked about professors. The other thing I just want to say in addition, and I'm putting, I think, Dr. Camera on the spot, but also ask the pre-health advisors on what, which students do they know of that took a gap year last year and who have successfully now, been able to get into medical school. And I know with Dr. Lowy, who is not here, Dr. Brenda Lowy is a pre-health advisor on the Barron campus. I know that she oftentimes keeps in touch with a lot of alumni, and she might be able to suggest places again, for you to, alumni, I'm sorry, for you to connect with. And we also at the Career Center may have suggestions because we work very closely with students in terms of their application and their personal statements, et cetera. Oftentimes we might know of somebody who worked somewhere. I mean, I will tell you that a student recently has now an interview at a fertility clinic, not at yours, by the way, Temi, but at an independent fertility clinic. And she had gotten that lead because of an alumna who is now currently going to medical school. And the person, as you said, kind of gave her the introduction, and that certainly helped her get the interview. So thank you all for kind of putting in there's no one right way to do it. And there are many different, avenues.
I just wanted to add one thing to that,
Sure,
which is that just to be cognizant when you're pursuing opportunities of what the length of time commitment that opportunity will actually require. So students are often tempted to say, I'm going to wait till my application's done, my MCAT's done, then I'm going to think about these opportunities. And most places want at least a full year commitment. So you kind of have to get started a little bit ahead of time in order to make sure that you can give them that full year commitment.
Yep.
Can I jump on that?
Yes. Please.
So, because I took 2 gap years, and something that I found, and the reason why I ended up taking 2 gap years, was the positions that I was a lot more interested in, the ones that gave me this really great clinical and research experience. And I was really able to say, this is experience that will help me so much in my application. They all told me we need a 2-year commitment, and not everyone has that 2-year commitment. But time and time again, I came all the way to like, they were giving me a job and they're like, we want you to have this job, but you need to give 2 years. And at some point I was like, I needed to decide, did I want to do 1 year and do a job that would have been less enjoyable for me, it would have been less productive. And a lot of research PIs told me that if you want to publish, if you want to feel like you're part of a lab, if you want to do real work, giving 2 years really will get you to that point. And I found that because right now I'm writing my own papers. I'm about to leave soon, and I'm like really just writing up my research, being able to submit to publications. I'm going to a conference, and that really was because I was here for 2 years. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. It doesn't work for everyone, and timelines are different, but 2 years really could get you to the point where it will just enhance your application exponentially. So that's just something I wanted to put out there.
Yeah, I think that's particularly true, Temi, for research positions in particular. I think, I think one can find clinical positions sometimes with a less commitment, but I agree with you. I think many students are a little nervous about making a 2-year commitment because they're already saying, oh my God, I'm delaying medical school for 1 year. I'm going to delay it now for 2 years. And just to address something that Dr. Kamara said is, I think that oftentimes, especially students at YU, and although I have to say I have not worked with many students outside of YU when it comes to medical school advisement, but I think they have a very myopic view that, you know, like I'm on this treadmill, right? And I have to go from here to here to here to here to here. And they don't realize, wait a second, I could actually take another year to kind of breathe and take in more experiences and making myself a more competitive applicant. And I think that's really the barometer by which students should think about their gap year, is what will make me a more competitive candidate. So thank you, all of you, for sharing that. So in addition to the gap years that you've taken, I think, Zev, you mentioned it, that you also use the year to kind of explore a hobby of yours. I think that's what you mentioned, something about exploring hobbies or just doing some introspection. I think you mentioned that, Zev. So I wondered if the 3 alumni can talk about any experiences, either volunteering or extracurricular, that either you did during the gap year, in addition to whatever you did during your gap year, or any extracurricular activities or volunteering that you did while you were at a student, an undergraduate student at YU. So Zev, since I mentioned you first, maybe would you mind starting with that? Just sharing
Sure.
the experiences.
Yeah, sure. So during my time at YU, besides school, I guess I was involved in some research towards the end, like I mentioned before, which had the connections to led to my gap year job. But I was also involved with Project START and the YU Literacy Project, which I enjoyed both of those. Those are both involved with going to public schools in the Heights and helping to supplement education in the sciences. I helped with math with the literacy program. So, you know, being able to teach a bit, help out with students in the classroom. So those were definitely experiences that I had and I enjoyed. I got an EMT certification, and I did a little bit of volunteer EMTing, but not very long due to COVID, didn't quite work out. So definitely opportunities to, you know, there are plenty of opportunities around YU that there are always emails going around. The career and advisement centers can help also with finding things that might be helpful, helping you choose what may be more or less helpful. So there are definitely opportunities to be involved in those kind of things. That's what I did during my gap year. Besides my job, it was less formally involved with a certain organization or program for my extracurriculars, but it was more, just like I said before, working on my application, trying to be a bit of a person, having some hobbies, you know, hanging out with friends. I like playing chess, so I was playing a lot of chess, like not professionally, but like in some more tournaments and stuff. I got married that year, so that took some time also, and moving. So definitely just also being yourself a little bit, because schools want to see that, and also besides that, it's important for yourself, your sanity, just to be yourself a little while.
Okay. Sheila?
Yeah, I totally agree about the sanity. Gap years are amazing because you come home and you don't have homework, and like it's your first opportunity in your academic career where you can kind of just see what it's like to enjoy life in like a really liberating way. In undergrad, I was kind of involved in similar things to Zev. I was also on TAC, which is the Tour Activities Council, the Student Council, for a year. I was very involved in research in undergrad. I real plug to getting involved in like becoming close to your professors and working in their labs. I think that my most, probably the thing that has helped me most significantly up to now has been finding mentors in my institutions and working with them. In undergrad, I worked with Dr. Drury for 2 years. He helped me like apply for fellowships. I got fellowships through him, went to conferences published through him. So I think that there really are a lot of opportunities even within the institution that you can really utilize. And then in my gap year, on the side, I was an assistant professor. I think Temmie was in the class at that time, to Rabbi Schwartz, to his Talmud class. And I worked in Ramaz on Fridays. I was a cool fellow there. So that was just like extra ways to make money and doing things that I enjoyed. That kind of tied into my whole scene.
You're muted, Naomi.
Thank you, Dr. Mara. Amar Sapir has a question. Can we unmute Rebecca? Can we unmute him? Did you want to ask? Yes, go ahead, please.
Hey everyone, I have a question. I'll be happy to raise the question to all the medical students that are here. Currently, I'm a student at Yeshiva University, but I'm just thinking once we go out to the real world, and that's the extent, then eventually, you know, to become a researcher, a doctor, whatever is our personal desires in a work-related position. I'm curious to know how the Jewish life is in all these campuses that you're working in. How are you able to combine your Jewish life in it? I'd be happy to hear that.
Okay, so Sapir, maybe what we can do, maybe I'll just ask Temmie if she can just finish the question about what she did while she was at YU. And then maybe this is a question that all three of you can think about in terms of what is, I think what you're asking, Amar, is what is the Jewish life like, right? On their particular medical school. So we'll ask them that question in 1 minute, but I just want to give, except I don't see her, I just want to give Temmie the opportunity to just answer the question that we talked about, what they did in college and what they did during their gap year that made them a competitive candidate. So Temmie, are you there?
Mhm.
Okay.
So I guess a little bit like Tehila, I got involved in research in Dr. Alayev's lab one summer, and there was an abstract that was an author in that was sent to a conference, and other than that, I don't know. Somebody could say if this was good advising or not, but I just didn't really get involved in the typical pre-med extracurriculars. I think that made my application a little bit more interesting. I wrote for the student newspapers. I was involved in the Dramatics Society. I did volunteering outside of YU. I volunteered at a homeless shelter. I did a lot of advocacy work in other ways. So if somebody is thinking the opportunities that all my friends are doing are not for me for whatever reason, but everyone says you need to do X to get into medical school, but I want to do Y, I would kind of say I was fine without it. I think I got to meet different people than the pre-med bubble at Stern a little bit because I did a lot of other things. And that came up a lot in interviews about my writing for newspapers and the Dramatics Society. And I spoke a lot about being a stage manager. People really liked that one. And as long as you make anything tied back to medicine in some kind of way, people are really interested in it. You got leadership opportunities or skills and whatnot like that.
Great. But Temmie, you also did, as you said, volunteering outside of Yeshiva University, which was, I think, helpful also.
Yeah, I would say that maybe it's the opposite of your question, Sapir, but a lot of times I feel like if people stay in the Jewish bubble in school, like in college, sometimes it's detrimental because you're going to be going to a college university that's most likely not a Jewish school. And the one question they're going to ask you is kind of how can you, I don't know, interact with the bigger world and to have experience with diverse populations and kind of not even needing to answer that question for them and just being on your application for me was really helpful.
Great. And Tehila, do you want to talk a little bit about life at Cornell in terms of what Amir was trying to get at?
Sure. So I think that going to like any secular university, etc., the way to really like balance your life, etc., is just to be proactive. So I think in terms of like Jewish holidays, etc., I was just always very proactive in terms of making sure to email the administration far in advance to get the dates that I needed off. And they've always been super accommodating. I don't have there isn't a very large Orthodox population in our school. There are currently 4 or 5 of us scattered throughout all the MD and MD PhD classes. So in a way that actually makes it a little bit more helpful because we're not coming in a pack. So they work to kind of accommodate us all individually. But I think that in schools that they come in a pack, they usually accommodate everybody together and think about it a little bit more. So there's kind of a balance based on which kind of institution you choose. I would encourage you not to like use that as I think in general, every institution will accommodate you. There's like legal ramifications. So I encourage you to think about kind of everything else about the school and then work that in, because it will be worked in as opposed to making that your priority.
Great. And I'm sorry. And Zev, obviously, you have a different experience, but did you want to share that?
Sure. Also, I think up here, I think you mentioned during the gap year also, I would say for the gap year, it is what you make of it, which is true in life in general. If it's something you prioritize and you want to really focus on, then where you choose to live, who your friends are, it'll all make a difference in terms of the experience you have in terms of your Judaism, how you spend your free time. It's definitely something that was important to me. So, I was living in the Heights for my gap year. There's definitely a Jewish life there. And a lot of my free time, I was still involved with, things that matter to me with my Judaism. But then it's in school in general, like Tehila was saying, exactly, you have to advocate for yourself a bit. It's a bit different than Einstein, since Einstein historically was a Jewish school. And so it still has a bit of that historical background there. For your first year, you're off, and your first year and a half, we're off for Jewish holidays. But going forward, you just have to let them know that you need accommodations to, for certain days of rotations that you'll have holidays for. And there's a very big Jewish community here, an Orthodox community here, which is nice. But again, yeah, like Tehila was saying, I wouldn't necessarily choose a school based on that or choose experiences based on that, because you can always make sure, if it's something that matters to you, to advocate and make what you want to make of it wherever you are.
Great. Great. Now, there are 3 questions. Thank you. Thank you all. So there are 3 questions. One, I want to introduce to each, one question for each panelist. Zev, since you're on, this is your question. That how did your experience at Mount Sinai prepare you for your current studies at Einstein?
It's a good question. My answer going into the year, what I assumed my answer would have been, was definitely different than what the answer ended up being, because 2 weeks into starting my job was when things started closing for COVID and the whole world changed. So the job I was applying for and starting out with was not actually what I ended up spending most of the year doing. I went in hoping to be involved with research and my own project, and that was the plan. And then 2 weeks in, COVID hit. So things started to close down. People started processing their data rather than starting new projects. So I was definitely helping out with different projects. I was definitely very involved with making sure the lab was keeping on top of what it had ordered, what it needed to order, the organizational stuff, because it was tougher to get things because of backlogs and all that. So I was definitely, instead of having my own project, I was involved with everyone's projects in some way, and also with the whole lab in some way. So I guess, big organizational skills there, I guess. But I mean, that was, I guess, more of a minor part. But I guess the biggest thing that I got from my gap year in the end would be, the ability to adapt. That sometimes the role that you want to have in a certain position, volunteer role, work, whatever it is, it's important to know going in what you want to do and to advocate to make sure that you can get what you need to get out of it. But sometimes certain jobs have to get done and someone has to do them. This is true in medicine also. As an EMT, sometimes you want to be the person doing the CPR, but someone has to, go and grab the oxygen tank from the ambulance. So it might not be the most glamorous job that you saw yourself doing, but the ability to be a team player, to adapt, is definitely something that I got out of my year, along with, like I said before, the actual research, the time to work my application, the reasons I took the gap year in the first place, which were all still there.
Great, thanks. Adaptability is really important in life. So thank you, Zev, for saying that. Temi, how do you feel that your experience at Columbia University's Fertility Center has given you insights that you might want to specialize in down the line?
So I didn't even start medical school yet, but you have a lot of rotations, a lot of time to really figure out which specialty you want to go into. But I think that my experience at Columbia really gave me the ability to say, this is what I like in medicine, and this is what I'm interested in medicine. So instead of, a lot of my interview questions were a lot of, what do you see yourself in 10 years? What kind of physician do you want to be? And I was able to say, here's what I love about my job right now. If some, like, I love fertility because that's what I know and that's what I've been doing for 2 years, but I was able to say, here's the things I really like about this field. I really like seeing patients over a long period of time. I really like the relationship I've been able to make with patients. And I think that that just gave me like a little bit of a leg up in terms of being able to say, I want to be a doctor, and here's exactly why, and here's the kind of doctor I want to be, and here's the kind of patient population I appreciate, etc. And kind of going like that. In one of my interviews, somebody asked me, what specialty do you want? And I said, if I had to choose right now, it would be fertility, but that's because that's what I know the most of. I could do the best work. But I guess a little bit we'll see when I actually get to rotations.
You're muted again, Naomi.
Dr. Kamara, what would I do without you? Okay, so I think you addressed this, Tahila, but since you took a gap year and did non-medically related experience, do you feel that that was beneficial, or do you, again, and this is your opinion, obviously, we're asking your opinion, or do you think that students should stick to a medically related field, medical related work during their gap year?
I certainly think that people should do what they love. I think that it's a full year or 2 years of your and if you end up taking a research position or being a medical scribe, which a lot of people do, some people love it, some people really don't like it. And I think taking time to make sure that whatever you're spending time doing is something that you're really going to enjoy. These are your years, like, quote unquote, off to do something else. Is probably the most important thing.
Great. I think, first of all, I just want to say that I apologize for not introducing myself at the beginning. My name is Naomi Kapp, and I'm one of the career advisors in the Career Center, the Sheva Glaubach Center. And I want to open up, if it's okay now, I want to open up the floor to any questions. So, Rebecca, how do you think we should handle this? Just asking people to raise their hand?
Yeah, if anyone has a question.
Okay, so does anyone here have a question that they want to ask any of the panelists or even Dr. Kamara? Now's the time for anybody thinking about it.
Isaac has a question. He's just raising his hand physically.
Oh, please. Okay, so Isaac, go ahead. Can we unmute Isaac?
I thank you all for organizing this and the panelists for coming to speak. My question is, when in your pre-med process, like in undergrad, did you decide to take a gap year? Like, what classes had you taken up until that point? When were you planning to take your MCAT? When have you taken your MCAT? You've already done so. Yeah, good elaborate.
Yeah, I think that's something we actually haven't touched upon yet. That's really important. I think in terms of planning, especially for people on the Berrien campus, there's a lot of pressure to graduate within 3 years, at least when I was there. And I think that
Still is.
within that context, it's very difficult to schedule your MCAT for your second year and have taken all your prerequisites before that. So almost everybody will, usually there's like maybe 1 or 2 a year that will try to apply straight from undergrad, but almost everyone will kind of default into gap year just based on the fact that it's almost impossible to get in your prereqs before taking your MCAT. I don't know if that completely answers your questions, but I'll pass it on to the other panelists.
Yeah, I'll say that on the Wilf campus, there's still some pressure to finish in 3 years, but a lot less, I think, than the Barron campus. So I went in with the plan to do 4 years. I figured I would, take my time, do my classes. There wasn't much of a rush. I ended up finishing my graduation and pre-med requirements within 3.5. So I graduated in January. My plan at that point, when I saw that I was getting my last semester would be ending in January, I figured, great, I'll finish this up and then I'll, start studying for my MCAT like January, February, hopefully take it like March, April, I ended up scheduling for May, and I figured, great, I'll, be applying during the meantime, and I'll finish my MCAT early enough in the summer, and then I'll just apply, and I guess that would be still a year, um, but I ended up pushing off my MCAT until July. At that point, I figured like I'm not gonna be ready. When I saw I was gonna push it off, I realized I wouldn't be ready to apply that year. And without knowing my score, I didn't want to apply. So I decided to end up, I took my MCAT then, but I applied, the following year. So I ended up having like a year and a half off, considering I graduated a bit early. So it kind of depends on the rate of your classes when you feel ready to take the MCAT. If you feel like there's a semester you have more time to take the MCAT, then that's great. But there's really no reason to try to avoid a gap year, take your MCAT earlier while you're still taking classes, not do as well in your classes or your MCAT because you're trying to do both at the same time. It definitely makes sense to try and do things well and take a little more time to do them than to try and rush and finish in 3 years and have your MCAT done and apply right then, no gap year. I think that spreading it out, it makes a lot more sense, which is why it's becoming more and more prevalent to do that.
Great. And did you want to say something, Temi, about
Yeah,
that?
sure. I graduated in 2021. So if I didn't want to take a gap year, I was gonna have to take the MCAT in 2020. And that was just, they were being canceled left and right. People were flying across the country to try to get dates. So I just stopped studying. I was like, I'm gonna have to take a gap year. I was really okay with it, and it just made sense. And then when I was studying again in 2021, I was also graduating, and I was taking a lot of classes, and kind of like what Zev said, really quickly, I realized that if I wanted to do well in my classes, the MCAT would just have to kind of go to the side for a bit. And then I ended up pushing off the MCAT. And I also had the luxury of free pushing off because of COVID. So it made it extra easy to just say, oh, not taking the MCAT this month or the next month or the next month. I didn't have to pay rescheduling fees for a while, but then I took a job that was a 2-year position, and then that kind of helped me schedule how I was going to take the MCAT, how I was going to apply, and go from there.
To follow up with that, Isaac, and be very specific to your question, it's is a little bit different for every student because, as you've heard, everyone's situation is different. Some people have a very regimented plan, and their plan is to graduate in 3 years, take that MCAT, and then May comes and they've scheduled, I'm sorry, April comes and they've scheduled their MCAT for May, and they are like, I am not ready, right? In which case, now it's time to think about other options. But for the most part, what I would recommend to you is to meet with me regularly. And so what I would like to do is meet with everyone in specifically their junior year. This gives us time to take stock of what courses you've taken, what requirements you're taking, how your clinical hours are, plan out your last year to see how it goes, what the plan is, and talk to you about what's best for you. If you're thinking about taking a gap year, making plans for a gap year, I would say the absolute latest you should probably start making, not the absolute latest, you should really start making plans probably around January before you graduate. That gives you a nice 4, 5, 6 months to try and find something that's right for you. And often people are looking for things to start later. They know that people coming out of college are going to be graduating in May. In June, they have lots of things that will start in the summer, but you can't start looking in the summer because those jobs have already been promised to people. So usually starting somewhere around there is pretty good. But at the end of the day, the Career Center and the Advisement Center are here to help you no matter when you start. We might huff and puff a little bit and wag a finger saying, how come you didn't think about this earlier, right? But at the end of the day, we are absolutely going to help you.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what Dr. Kamara is saying, that every student is different. And both on the Barron campus, as well as on the Wilf campus, you have 2 very experienced people who are going to guide you through the process in the pre-health advisement centers. And so you really need to take advantage of the services that you have there, because they have the most up-to-date information on what schools are looking for, right? As well as what timeframes seem most realistic. Most realistic, even though, again, it can be every student applying is an individual and has to assess their own time commitments and their availabilities, etc. I think Sapir had a question as well. Sapir? Do you still have that question?
Yes. I wanted to know, first of all, thank you everyone for meeting today. We really, I and we really appreciate it. So thank you. And I wanted to know, for example, Zev, I think you, like some people do research in one location and then do the medical in other location. In terms of like, commuting and look, balancing your time, how, like, what will be the best approach that one will take that, in your opinion?
Zev, I think that's directed to you.
Yeah, if I understood the question, I think you're asking, how to work out the logistics of where you want to end up doing your research or your work, whatever else you're doing. What like priorities to balance in terms of commuting time and all that. I would say that a lot of that is secondary. All that really is secondary to the job that you think, first of all, or the role, whatever job role that you think you'll get the most out of and that you'll enjoy the most and will fill your application. That's kind of the priority there. Something that you think don't apply to, if you want to live here, don't apply to jobs in like Washington State, but like assuming that it's somewhat reasonable, you should try and find something that you think will fill that hole in your application, you'll get something out of, you'll enjoy, you can kind of, have a bit of a time to yourself that year. And then the logistics, okay, if you have 2 jobs or 3 jobs that look like they might all seem interesting and doable and on the same level, okay, maybe you can prioritize a lot of the logistics there. But if a job's going to be 30 minutes or an hour and 15 every day to get back and forth, but one might have a longer commute, but it's a much better situation for you. I think that, the looking back on it later when you're in school or done with like in medical school, you'll be happier to have done something that you enjoy, that you got something out of, than to have saved yourself an extra half hour a day. I don't think that that's necessarily something you want to base your choice based off of.
Importantly,
I'm not sure.
like,
Sorry.
go ahead, Tila.
I'm not sure if this is what you were touching on, but I will say that doing research at one institution during your gap year can be a shoo-in to get an interview, but even that's not a guarantee. So I think a lot of people will choose institutions based on where they want to end up going to medical school. And it could be helpful because you're certainly building connections, but if you're only doing it so that you can get a shoo-in, just know that that's not like a guarantee long-term.
What I wanted to just say as well, Sapir, is just that, this idea of balancing things in different locations, this is just basically your first foray into this in all of life, but it's going to be all of life, right? Where you have these disparate obligations that are happening in different places and you have to figure out what works and you'll figure it out. But to just reiterate what pretty much everyone has said, I know we've said this in meetings for those of you that have already met with me, is what's very important is intentionality, is setting a goal and being kind of, to be intentional about it, right? You don't want to seem like you're taking the easiest thing, or I took this job because that was the one that I got and I wasn't really interested and I didn't really thrive in it. Because when you come to interviews and people ask you questions, you have to be able, they can smell and sense that you're kind of feeding them a line about why you took it, as opposed to saying that I set this goal for myself. I looked and I found this and I put in the hard work. And yes, the commute was terrible, or maybe the commute was easy, or this was a difficult thing, but I really learned these things. I grew in these ways and I achieved these things, which is what I set out to do. And setting those intentional things is very, very important. Those are the types of skills and things that really work well in interviews and help you stand out as a candidate. And that's the thing to remember about, candidacies. If you have that GPA above 3.7, you have checked all the boxes, generally speaking, ability is not the thing that is being questioned in this application process. Once you meet those requirements, right? You're going to be in a sea of people that are also very qualified. It's how do you show that you are most prepared and a unique person to be memorable to the admissions committee and the board.
Can I just add one
Thank
other
you.
thing about that? I did a summer internship during COVID that I drove, I don't know, 1.5, 2 hours each way. And I put that on my application in some clever way about how the 3-hour daily drive, how I used that drive to listen to podcasts about health. And spinning it that way made it really interesting. And everybody wanted to ask me, why did you do a position so far away? And I explained it was COVID and a lab needed help with COVID research. and it really helped me. Was it a great driving experience? Maybe not. It was very tiring. But also just saying it was COVID and I was willing to help and I was there, and the commute, I made it work. That could really, I don't know, you could spin anything is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Great. So I see we've come to the end of our time. Is there anybody that has just a pressing question they can't leave without having been answered?
Alex, it's like he has one.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
It's not too much of a pressing question, but I was just wondering, what was the I've heard a lot that like medical schools require like 3.7 GPA, but then other people have told me, you need about 3.9 if you want to be competitive. I was wondering what you guys, like a ballparks you guys had, just to get an idea.
I'll take this one. So first, my strongest advice to you is to talk to the pre-health advising center. Talk to us. Don't talk to, I mean, you can talk to other students, but we are the experts. We literally talk to the admissions deans at all of these schools several times a year. And what we'll tell you is that holistic admissions starts at a 3.7. So if you have a 3.7 GPA, you've met the kind of GPA requirements, and they're going to look at your entirety of your package. That being said, there are people walking around with a 3.5, with a 3.6. The 3.7 isn't necessarily as hard of a stop as you might think, especially when you take into account people that have other majors. Engineering majors are very hard to get a 3.7 in while doing all of these pre-med prerequisites and things like that. So they can often be a little bit lower of a GPA. However, as long as you are kind of in that pocket, they're going to be looking at the entirety of your application. A 3.7 might not look as good as a 3.9, but a 3.7 with excellent research or with a fantastic prolonged clinical exposure. Maybe you've volunteered in an ER for 3 full years and you have these wonderful recommendations from the ER department there. Those things can balance each other out. So you do not need a 3.9, but a 3.7 is absolutely kind of the place where you should be shooting to be there or above. And then the other question is simply, what schools are you applying to, right? If you're applying to ultra elite institutions, we're talking about, we have 2 students that are going to Weill Cornell and Harvard in here. Yes, the higher the GPA, the better, but there are certainly students walking around Harvard, Columbia, NYU with 3.7s, 3.65, things like that. So just there's no real big rule other than to shoot for that over 3.7.
Can I add one thing you said about the recommendations? That's just super important when you are looking at any position you're going to do for a gap year. If you're doing something for a year, it's kind of expected you'll get a lot of recommendations. That's just something to really keep in mind when you're looking for a position, like keeping in mind how you're interacting with everybody you're working with, how you're going to be choosing a job based off of the kind of letter of recommendation you want, if that makes sense. So if you don't have a letter of recommendation from a doctor and that's something you think you might need, then maybe working with a physician will give you that as well. And then also I just went to the Harvard Admitted Students Week a few weeks ago, and they had everyone raise their hand who did a gap year. And it was actually 3/4 of the class. So I would just tell anyone who's questioning about a gap year that I actually met a few students who didn't do a gap year, and everyone was asking them, like, why didn't you do one instead of the other way around? So at least the landscape right now at Harvard, I don't know about the other schools, is really so many people are doing gap years and people are doing such interesting things. One person was a ski patrol in Vermont, and all kinds of things. And I just wanted to put that out there because that was really interesting to me to meet how 3/4 of the class did a gap year this year.
Great. So thank you.
Just to highlight, you can, I think, always just do your best. I think that's the way to go about things, but you can always balance out like MCAT and GPA. Like MCAT ends up being a really, really important part of your application. And if your GPA is a little lower, but you have really strong MCAT scores, you don't have to worry about it.
Right. Just to reiterate what Dr. Kamara was saying, it's a formula. It's not just one thing that's going to, stop you necessarily from getting in. I mean, I guess a really poor MCAT score might, but it is a formula, and it's looking at how are you going to make yourself the best candidate for medical school. And that, I think, speaking to the pre-health advisors, on both campuses, or pre-health academic advisement centers on both campuses will help you be able to assess that. And the Career Center as well, the Shevik Laubach Center, can certainly also help you with that. But the experts, as Dr. Kamara said, are the pre-health advisors. So a pre-health advisement center advisors. So thank you all for coming, really. As you can see, we have some illustrious alumni, and hopefully the students here who are attending the this gap year panel will also be later on also illustrious alumni, and you'll be successful in reaching your goals. And please know that there are services here, the Pre-Health Advisement Center, as well as the Career Center, the community that we're now divided into communities, and myself and Daniel Coleman are the advisors, the career advisors in the Shevik Laubach Center that can also help you, begin to assess and develop a successful plan of to reach your goal in medical school, in applying to medical school. So we look forward to seeing everybody in the future. And students can email careerstrategy@yu.edu if they want to make an appointment. Is that it, Rifki?
Yeah.
If they want to make an appointment with someone in the Career Center. And Dr. Kamara, I know for the men on the Wilf campus, I think everybody has Dr. Kamara's email, but you want to just give it out there again?
CAMARA@yu.edu, but you can just make an appointment with me through Starfish, or is this, I'm sorry, the Student Success Portal.
Okay, great. And for Dr. Lowy, I know, I think it's lowy@yu.edu. So again, thank you everyone for coming. Thank the panelists, thank Dr. Kamara, and thank the students for coming. And more importantly, I want to thank my colleague, Rebecca Tarabello, who helped organize this panel and really got it off to a wonderful start, and has been a wonderful colleague. Thank you again for coming. Rebecca, did you want to say anything before we leave?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good weekend and nice Shabbos.